Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Way T Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we're going to talk about metabolic health. And we have an expert with us, Dr. Philip Ovadia, who is a board certified cardiac surgeon and founder of the Ovadia Heart Health. His mission is to optimize public's metabolic health and help people stay off his operating table. As a heart surgeon who used to be morbidly obese, Dr. Ovadia has firsthand seen the failures of mainstream diets and medicine. He realized that what helped him lose over 100 pounds was the same solution that could have prevented most of the thousands of open heart surgeries he has performed. In Stay Off My Operating Table, a heart surgeon's metabolic guide to lose weight, prevent disease, and feel your best every day, Dr. Ovadia shares the complete metabolic health system to prevent disease. He grew up in New York, graduated from accelerated pre-med program in Pennsylvania State University and Jefferson Medical College. This was followed by a residency in general surgery at the University of Medicine and Dentistry at New Jersey and a fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery at Tufts New England Medical School. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Wade. It's great to be here. I really love the messaging of your podcast. You know, awesome health is what we should all be aiming for. And unfortunately, way too commonly these days, people don't realize that awesome health is possible.
Well, you know, there's a conundrum that strikes me. One of my passions is I'm always impressed with how hard medical industry professionals work to get to their positions. One of my dear friends is a fellow by the name of Dr. Horst Filtzer, who was part of the team that put the first stent in the body. And he's about 80 years old. He's a great guy. And what's interesting is he himself was morbidly obese, and now he's starting to to go down. But you'd think, here's a heart surgeon, you know all about the problems of what causes a bad heart and the risks and the cardiovascular risks and the drugs and the surgeries. And it's incredible what you guys do. I mean, it's really complicated to become a surgeon, and then to become a heart surgeon is another level. It's a really grueling, tough thing to be part of, and you pay a huge price oftentimes to get to that position, which is kind of contraindicative, if you will, to what you're trying to achieve. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, so, you know, I knew from a young age that I wanted to be a physician. And actually, I specifically, for reasons that I still don't really know, always wanted to be a surgeon. And as you said, you know, the path to get there is pretty difficult. You know, going through medical school and then the training afterwards to become a surgeon, and then, you know, specifically to become a heart surgeon, it is a very long and difficult path.
How many years did that take you?
So after I completed medical school, I then had 7 years of training to become a heart surgeon. So, you know, 11 years if you add in medical school, and then college, you know, before that. So, you know, very long journey, lots of, you know, kind of long hours, and obviously a lot of knowledge that you need to take in. And I think, you know, during that time, a lot of physicians don't pay attention to their own health. You know, we are there to serve our patients, and we put our patients' needs first. But even more concerning to me is, you know, when I look back, I realized that even if I was interested in, you know, my own health during that time, the advice that I was learning in school did not serve me, did not keep me healthy. And that same advice that I had been giving to my patients for many years, I again realized was not helping to keep them healthy. Our focus in the healthcare system is how to manage people who are diseased. We are not focused on how to keep people from getting those diseases in the first place. And, you know, thankfully, I had my eyes open about 5 years ago. I was able to improve my own health. And what I came to realize is that what had allowed me to improve my health would be the same things that not only would help my patients recover better from having heart surgery, but actually could help people prevent the need from heart surgery in the first place. And so that has become my new, mission, my new calling to help people to stay off my operating table.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating. There's so many people, and one of my pet peeves is that there's people in what I would call the health advocacy industry, and there's people in the medical industry, and they're both trying to keep people healthy from a different perspective, I think. And oftentimes they're at odds with each other, as opposed to seeing that they're both different sides of the same thing, as that's to keep people alive and thriving and so forth. But I'm curious to find out, as someone who was through the allopathic model, what was the trigger point for you to say, hey, you know what? I've got to make a change in my own life, or I'm going to end up on the table that I've helped so many other people.
Yeah, so I would say there was, a combination of triggers and then, a little bit of good fortune that ultimately allowed me to get healthy. So about 5 years ago, I was now 10 plus years into my career as a heart surgeon. I was morbidly obese, I was pre-diabetic, and I knew that I was going to end up on my own operating table, so to speak. I had two young children at the time and a wonderful wife, and, I needed to do something. But quite honestly, I was at a loss as to what to do because I had tried what I had learned in medical school and in my training and the advice that I was giving my patients, eat less, move more, eat a low fat diet, the US, the food pyramid, all of that had failed me as it had failed many of my patients. And thankfully, I started to come across some alternative thoughts about, why we get obese, why we get unhealthy. One of my earliest experiences was actually hearing Gary Taub's lecture at one of the medical meetings I was attending, and immediately read his books at that time, The Case Against Sugar and Why We Get Fat and Good Calories, Bad Calories, and the concept of the types of food that we eat is more important than the amount of food that we eat. And that was the first time that I had heard that. And I adopted a low carbohydrate dietary approach. I was able to lose the weight, reverse my pre-diabetes, and then I started asking, why didn't I hear this before?
Mm.
Why was I hearing this from a journalist, an investigative journalist, and a book author instead of hearing this from medical school professors or my colleagues or the medical societies. And that led me down a path where I came to realize that, we have the wrong focus in healthcare. We are too focused on taking care of sick people, and that doesn't allow us to help people not get sick in the first place.
This is which is a bold conclusion to come to, and one that's not, I would say, popular, especially within the industry. As a professional in the industry, what was it like when you came to these conclusions with your colleagues, and you've made your own transformation, and then you decide, hey, I'm going to write about this as a medical doctor. I'm going to write about my process. What was there? Supportive elements? Were there resistive elements? What was going on in your professional career? Because I think that's a big issue for a lot of people who come up with discoveries that might not be lockstep with what's currently in vogue.
Exactly, and this kind of shows, the sort of, schizophrenic nature, I guess, of medicine and of healthcare practitioners. Because obviously, my colleagues saw the great results that I had gotten. They saw how healthy I had become. And despite that, when I talked about what allowed me to do that, and it goes contrary to, much of the advice that, we are given, being a heart surgeon, obviously, the recommendations of the American Heart Association are very important in my field of specialty. And most of what I was now advising, contradicted that, or at least, somewhat questioned some of the validity there. So that certainly has led to some pushback from colleagues. But, again, I let the results speak for themselves. And that goes both ways. I, am not shy about pointing out that we have been getting the same advice about what to eat. You know, the US dietary guidelines, the American Heart Association dietary guidelines have essentially been unchanged for the past 40 years. And during that time, our health as a nation has clearly worsened. You know, we are
Mhm.
now at a point where 88% of the adults in the United States are not metabolically healthy. Heart disease remains the number one killer in the United States and worldwide. So we really have to start to question, you know, we are not getting the results that we want. What, you know, we need to take another approach as the bottom line.
So, how would you classify that terminology, metabolic healthy? Like, what are the classifications and designations so people would understand how you define that versus say how maybe the American Heart Association might define that?
Yeah, so you know, the simplest explanation I give to people about what metabolic health is that when you are metabolically healthy, your body is properly utilizing the inputs that you're giving it, mostly in the form of food. And it's doing, you know, what we're supposed to do with food, which is one of three things. Basically, we can either turn it into energy to use immediately, fuel all of our activities on both the, you know, kind of macro level as well as the cellular level. Some of it is used to build and rebuild our tissues, which is a process that's always going on in our bodies. And then some of it's supposed to be stored in case we get into situations where food isn't available. What happens when we become metabolically unhealthy is that we end up storing too much of this food and too much energy, and we're never able to tap into those stored energy supplies, you know. And this is directly related to, you know, the types of food that we are eating and the ways that we are eating. There are a few metrics that I advise people to look at that are commonly accepted, you know, to measure metabolic health. And I think it's very important that people know these metrics. And far too often, what I see is that, you know, the information is available to people, the information is available to physicians, but they don't put it together properly to determine whether or not someone is metabolically healthy.
What are those metrics out of curiosity?
Yeah, so the five, you know, what I would say standardly accepted metrics of metabolic health are your waist circumference. So people can measure this at home. You take a tape measure just above the level of your belly button, best to measure it first thing in the morning. And if you are a man, you want that to be less than 40 inches. If you're a woman, you want it to be less than 35 inches. The next metric is your blood pressure. Again, you can check it at home. You can go to any grocery store or pharmacy these days, get it checked, or you can go to your doctor's office. And you want your blood pressure to be less than 130 over 85. And importantly, that needs to be without the use of medication. So if you have been diagnosed with high blood pressure and started on medication for it, that is a sign that you are not metabolically healthy. And then we look at some basic blood work, your fasting blood glucose level. And that needs to be less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. These are the United States units. And again, without the use of medications. If you have type 2 diabetes, you've been started on medication to lower your blood sugar, another sign that you are not metabolically healthy. And finally, we look at the cholesterol panel. And what's most interesting here is that the one cholesterol number that most doctors and most people are focused on, the LDL cholesterol, so-called bad cholesterol, is not a measure of metabolic health.
Right.
There were two other numbers on the standard cholesterol panel, your HDL cholesterol, which is your good cholesterol, and as the nickname implies, the higher the better there. And if you're a man, you want that to be over 40. If you're a woman, you want it to be over 50. And finally, the triglycerides, which are another number on your cholesterol panel, and you want that to be less than 150. So you look at those five measures. If three or more of those are abnormal, you are diagnosed with metabolic syndrome. And that means that you are at very high risk for developing things like heart disease, many forms of cancer, Alzheimer's disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, all of these things have been related to poor metabolic health. If you have one or two of those abnormal, it's a warning sign because we know that you are likely to progress to get three or more abnormal in the future. And
Hmm.
if you have all of those in line, if all five are where they should be, congratulations, only 12% of the adults in the United States today meet all five measures of metabolic health.
Got it. Only 12%. I mean, that's shocking. Now, you mentioned something here I think that's really important to understand, in that if you, so let's say we have people listening to this podcast without a doubt who them or someone they love is suffering from a variety of these conditions. And oftentimes what the doctors say, well, we're going to give you a statin drug. We're going to put you on insulin for manage your blood sugar. We're going to something to manage your blood pressure.
Right.
Right. So can you walk through what the standard procedures might be for someone on any one of those conditions, and then what you would suggest an ad will set you up for what you've discovered going on in your book, in your own journey?
Yeah, exactly. So, the standard, uh, when you go to your physician and they diagnose you with high blood pressure or type 2 diabetes, the standard is they're going to start you on medication for it. They're going to tell you that's the only option. And they are going to know, they may or may not say this, but they are going to know in the back of their mind that this problem is only going to worsen over time. And you're going to need more and more medication to manage it, and it's going to lead to more complications in the future. The reality is that both type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure are due to poor metabolic health, primarily from the foods we're eating. And if we focus on that root cause of poor metabolic health and we adopt habits that are going to improve your metabolic health, what we eat, the activities that we do, all of these other things that I talk about in the book, we can actually reverse type 2 diabetes. We can reverse high blood pressure. We can get people off these medications, or we can, prevent them from needing it in the first place by focusing on this early enough. But, one of the problems with our healthcare system these days is that we don't tie these things together. We don't look at
Mm.
these root causes. So you might go to your family doctor and he's going to start you on treatment for your high blood pressure. And then you're going to end up going to an endocrinologist who's going to take care of your type 2 diabetes. And then you're going to go see the cardiologist who's going to be working, on your heart disease. And they're not going to tie together that all three of these come from the same root cause, and that we can address that root cause and, better manage, possibly even reverse these conditions, and, ultimately have a better impact, a better outcome for the patient.
So now, when in your case, were you did you have any of those symptoms? Like, were you in those categories?
Yeah, so I was pre-diabetic. My fasting blood glucose was elevated. My hemoglobin A1C was elevated. So I was on the border of it. My waist circumference was certainly higher than, more than 40 inches. So I was failing that metric. And my cholesterol numbers, did not look good. So yeah, I had many of these things myself, and I've now improved them, and I am proudly one of the 12% that is metabolically healthy and can meet all five of those measures.
So what did you do, and how long did it take you on this? Because losing 100 pounds is, I mean, that's a remarkable accomplishment. How long have you had that off?
It's now been about 5 years that I've been able to
Wow.
maintain, lose and then maintain that weight loss over the past 5 plus years. And, I went through an evolution. As I said, it started, when I heard Gary Taubes talk, and I eliminated sugar from my diet, and then kind of went more of what I would call a dedicated, low carb diet, keto. And finally, I came to be carnivore, and have now maintained a primarily carnivore diet for the past 3 years or so. But importantly, what I want people to realize is that there isn't necessarily one right way to do this. One of the sections of my book talks about, all of the, or many of the popular diets of today, literally both carnivore and vegan, low carb diets like keto and paleo and Atkins, and the Mediterranean diet. And I try and highlight, what is metabolically healthy about each one of them,
Right.
and what may not be metabolically healthy about each one of them, because they all have their sort of pitfalls there. And I think looking at metabolic health as the measuring stick is what is ultimately going to allow people to, get the results that they are looking for. What too often happens is we get into our dietary camp, and,
Yes.
keto worked for me, and so everyone needs to go keto. Or, vegan is the only way to go,
Right.
carnivore is the only way to go.
Right.
And I don't favor that approach. What I
Me
say is that,
neither.
yeah, ultimately, yes, carnivore works great for me, but I work with patients who are vegan. I work with patients who are, keto and low carb and everything in between. And we need to find what works for you, with the framework being whatever we're doing is either improving our metabolic health or it's not improving our metabolic health.
Right.
And if it's not improving our metabolic health, we got to make some changes to get our metabolic health where it needs to be.
It's beautifully said. And Matt and my business partner, Matt and I, he's a ketogenic guy and I'm a vegetarian. We're pretty far on the pole, and I did raw food vegetarian. He's done carnivore. So we've been about as polar opposites, and we run the same company, and we've come to the exact same conclusions and have had plenty of discussions. We also have identified that there's advantages and disadvantages to every diet. And by understanding the different styles of diets and the benefits that may come from it, or the liabilities, you can then course correct even inside your chosen diet. So for example, for myself, getting certain essential fatty acids is a little bit more difficult than if I was on a ketogenic diet. And so, I have a special algae oil concoction that I have here that's been made by this lady that gives me the essential fatty acids that I don't get in my plant-based diet. Concordantly, Matt, his diet is very low in vegetables and certain elements that he supplements, vitamins and minerals that he is lacking from that diet. And then, with the different people we're dealing with, genetics and epigenetic response, you look at possible mutations, and some people are more susceptible. Like, I manage carbohydrates extremely well. My blood sugar looks like, when I do my HOMO IR tests, blood glucose and blood sugar response, insulin response, well, it looks like I'm on a ketogenic diet if you look at my numbers, and I'm eating carbs every day, but I have a high fiber consumption. So where someone else could follow my diet and they'd be wheeling them into the ER.
Right.
So how was it that you were able to come up with these parameters in order to provide the guidelines, I guess, so people can check the results? And how do you teach your students through the book, or if there's some pieces I'm missing, so that they can determine which one's right for them?
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
Yeah. So, For me, it was a lot of kind of trial and error. As I said, eliminating sugar, low carb initially, and then I got pretty good results. But I started tinkering, and as I said, ultimately came to carnivore. I've basically tried all of these things, and found what worked for me. But what was most enlightening, I guess, was then looking at, what are the commonalities between these approaches.
Mm.
And the one that really stands out in the end, and this is, one of the 7 principles of metabolic health that I outline in my book, is to eat whole real food. Because when you look at it, whether you're vegan, carnivore, paleo, whatever, whichever camp you end up falling into, the more whole real food you eat within the strategy, the better your metabolic health is going to be. We can't get away from the fact that, processed food is damaging to our health. And there is some argument, there is some discussion about what is it in the processed food. Is it the carbs? Is it the vegetable and seed oils? And my answer ultimately is I don't know for sure, but I know that the combination that is in all of our processed food of those things is not good for us.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the first principle, the primary principle around what you eat should be eat whole real food. And then you can figure it out, kind of from there, based on your preferences, based on your situation, your genetics, all of those, like you said, play a role in it. But that rule, I haven't found anyone who can thrive on eating processed food in the end.
Yeah, it's very difficult for certain. Now, in your diet, do you eat multiple times a day, or are you a one meal a day guy? Are you a multiple? How do you integrate that into your
Yeah, so I usually end up around the 2 meals a day, just because, carnivore, I think, lends itself to it. You're eating nutritionally dense foods, you're eating a lot of protein, and that keeps you pretty satiated. So for me, it ends up being twice a day. And this is another sort of principle that I talk through with, my patients and my clients, is that, I think intermittent fasting is great, but I'm not a fan of forcing intermittent fasting. I
Mm.
don't think it's the first thing that you do. What I tell people to do is find a way of eating that makes you hungry less often so that you just naturally start fasting.
I think that's a really salient point. And I think a lot of people aren't able to actually look at the framework of how different our world is compared to our ancestors who would go long periods of time with, frankly, restricted choices of food. They spent a considerable amount of time outdoors. Everything involved physical activity. They did not have access to preservatives and chemicals and agents. Most of the food was local and seasonal. And if you, I find it interesting. People talk about the historical diets of humans, and I'm thought, well, what part of the world were they living? Because I'm quite sure that the Vikings in the Scandinavian countries were living very different than the plainsmen in Africa, or tribesmen in South America, or North American Indians. I mean, they're going to be living very different lifestyles, and because of what's available. You couldn't go to Whole Foods, you couldn't go to the grocery store to get stuff. How much does physical activity um, play into metabolic health from your perspective?
Yeah, so, one of the other principles that I talk about is moving more. And I put it that way very purposefully, because I think too often we get caught up on exercising,
Right.
doing dedicated exercise sessions, and how much should we do and what type of exercise. And really, for most people, if we just figured out ways to move more, we're going to end up in a better place. And so that looks like, taking the stairs instead of the elevator or the escalator when you can. I notice you're standing while doing this interview. I'm standing while doing this interview. I try and stand up as much as possible and not be sitting at a desk. Just simple things like that are going to have a big impact. if you have the time to exercise and if you want to exercise, that's great. But I tell people it's really not necessary. If you are eating the right foods, exercise sort of becomes an optional add-on. Now, what I find is that when people start to improve their metabolic health and they start eating the right foods, they're naturally inclined to get more active and exercise more. I think when you're exercising, building and maintaining muscle is a good priority because we know that muscle is the most metabolically active tissue that we have. And we have very good data showing that the more muscle you're able to maintain as you age, the better your outcomes are going to be. I think I tell people that that should be their priority in terms of doing resistance exercises. Those can be simple body weight exercises. Those can be resistance bands. Those can be lifting weights. Whatever kind of suits your preferences and your lifestyle.
I think that's if you look at the living long and living strong as we look at, a lot of people underestimate the role of muscle tissue, especially as we get older. First for mobility and quality of life, obviously metabolic health to keep your metabolism up, but just also from the component of osteopenia, osteoporosis, some of these things that become very debilitating for our seniors. And they underestimate how much that can be reversed even at advanced age. And so we're dealing with a lot of older clients, in their 70s and 80s can, engage in strength training, a couple times a week and make remarkable gains in the quality of their life and their health. I think there was a study years ago on senior citizens over the age of 90. And they did this 8-week strength training program. I forget the university study it was. And most of them were able to reverse conditions where they were using walkers and movement aids, and their quality of life went up, and their health, the psychological health and ability to engage in life. And I think that's a strong message. What other things do people need to know about metabolic health and that you outline in your book without giving away? And we should, where can people, if we can let people know where we can get it and your website and all that stuff, that would be great as well. So.
Yeah, the book is widely available. It's called Stay Off My Operating Table. It's on all the major online platforms. You can go to my website, ovadiahearthealth.com. And if you go to the tab that says book, you can find all the information there. So I go through 7 principles of metabolic health. And, we talked about a few of them already, which are, eat whole real food and move more. The first principle that I outline, and I put it first because I think it's most important, is that you need to think of your health as a system, not as a goal. And that's kind of one of the key mindset issues that comes into this. Too often, we're focused on short-term goals around our health. I want to lose 20 pounds. And when you focus on a short-term goal, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either you're going to, make some changes and meet that goal. And then the tendency is to say, okay, I got where I wanted to be. I can go back to what I was doing before.
Right.
Or, probably more commonly, you're going to make some changes and you're not going to meet your goal. And you're going to get frustrated and you're going to get disappointed and you're going to say, why bother? I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before. And instead, what I hope people can do, what I try and coach, the people that I work with through, is thinking of your health as a system. If you say to yourself, I want to be metabolically healthy, and I am going to find the habits that support me being metabolically healthy, that's a more sustainable way to think. It's a more positive way to think. And so I think it leads to better success. And it becomes sort of self-reinforcing because you start to see the success you want. You will improve those metrics, those sort of short-term things like losing the 20 pounds or reversing your type 2 diabetes. But you're thinking of your, overall system, and you're basically finding those habits that you're going to be able to sustain long-term to make sure that you get the long-term success we're looking for.
You brought up something early in our interview that I want to address because it's a very dicey subject, particularly for people who are maybe suffering from one of these conditions, and there's two levels to it. One that might have had surgery or, in some invasive technique in order to overcome that condition. I got family members who have gone through that. So let's say someone's listening to this interview. They're on a number of different medications for the one or more medications for the conditions that you said that were leading to poor metabolic health. And they're engaging in a program that is such as what you're outlining in your book, and they're able to reverse those conditions. How do you deal with it with the doctor? Because many doctors don't want to take you off meds.
Right.
So how do you go about engaging in that process with your physician? If you're already on meds and you found a way to reverse that condition, then you want to get off them.
Yeah, so, this gets to the fact that you need to be proactive about your health. You need to take charge of your health. Realize that physicians are not supposed to be there to tell you what to do. Physicians are supposed to be there to educate you, to help you make the choices, that are going to best serve you. The Latin root of the word doctor is, to educate, is to
Yes.
teach. And, unfortunately, the healthcare industry, again, has kind of lost sight of that. So I go back to even, in my role as a heart surgeon, when I'm meeting with people every day that, have conditions that can clearly benefit from having heart surgery, I don't tell them that you need to have heart surgery. I try to explain to them what they have, why surgery might be beneficial to them. But, in the end, some of them decide that they don't want to have heart surgery. And as a physician, I need to be okay with that. I am okay with that. But unfortunately, a lot of physicians aren't. A lot of physicians see it as their role to, basically command the patients to do things. And, sometimes you can work with your physician on that. Sometimes the answer is to find a new physician. People shouldn't accept poor health. They shouldn't accept their physician telling them that medication is the only answer. And especially if if a person takes it upon themselves to start making changes and is seeing great results from those changes, if their physician is pushing back against those changes for whatever reason, that is not going to be a beneficial relationship in the end. So sometimes the answer is you need to seek out, different physicians, different partners in this journey to support your metabolic health. But hopefully, when you share this information with your physician, if you say, hey, I've read this great book, or I was looking at this website, and, I started doing this and now I'm doing a lot better. You can see that my numbers all look better. Hopefully, physicians are still curious enough to say, why did that work for this person? Why is this person, able to get off of these medications that I've never taken patients off before? And that they'll start to, come to some of these same conclusions.
And what about people who have had surgery? So I have family members who have had heart surgery.
Yep.
And are these principles applicable to them? Are they able to, because sometimes the physicians will keep them on medication for an extended period of time after as a precautionary method. What is your suggestions for those people? Do you address it in the book?
I do talk about it, and basically what I say is it's never too late to improve your metabolic health, and you're never going to harm yourself by improving your metabolic health. We might not be able to undo damage that has been done, but we can stop more damage from being done in the future. So again, going back to my role as a heart surgeon, when I operate on people, I now tell them, this the surgery that I'm going to do is going to lessen the impact of, the damage that has been done to your heart. It is going to improve you, but it is not going to change what led to you getting the heart disease in the first place. And if you don't change what led to you getting the heart disease in the first place, it's highly likely that, you're going to need more things done in the future. You're going to have ongoing damage to your heart. And ultimately, this is something that can kill you. And, most people respond well to that. If you go to a person, or if I'm a physician and a person comes to me and they have a condition like type 2 diabetes, and I say to them, you can take this medication, your condition is going to worsen. The medication is going to help you maybe slow down that progression, but we know that your condition will worsen. We know that you're going to need more and more medications, and you're ultimately going to have complications from the diabetes. Or you can change some things about your lifestyle, what you're eating and how you're living, and not need the medications and not suffer those complications. The vast majority of patients are going to choose the lifestyle and the diet. It's just that we don't frame it that way.
Mhm.
And we usually don't even give patients that option. Again, most physicians will just say to the patient, you need to take this medication, and that's the only solution to your problems.
Um, Very, very powerful information. And I have one question that's a little bit out of, again, if you can give us the title of the book and where they can get it, if you can hit us up with that again, we can put it in our notes.
Yeah, again, it's called Stay Off My Operating Table. And if you go to ovadiahearthealth.com/book, you'll get the links on where you can buy it. But it's on Amazon and all the major online platforms.
I have another question that you may or may not want to answer because it's something that has been coming to me. I answer a lot of questions from our consumers around the world, and some of them go outside the framework, and this is one of them. And so there's a lot of concerns about inflammatory conditions around people who get the vaccination, and that could complicate that situation. And I've seen some of the VAERS research, but I'm not an expert in heart conditions or diseases. What I'm curious about from the literature that you've read, or your suggestions about people getting vaccines or not, if they've had a heart condition, or if they've had heart surgery, or if they have a genetic condition around heart surgery, how do you feel the safety measures around those components?
Yeah, so I think, in general, what I tell people around, the COVID pandemic is that this has been a huge missed opportunity. It has been clear from the beginning of COVID that the people that get sick with it, the people that are most susceptible to it, are the people that are not metabolically healthy. And, not being metabolically healthy sets you up, oftentimes means that you have chronic inflammation, your immune system isn't working as it should. And, whether you get COVID or you get the vaccine, it can then set you off down a bad path. And, specifically now, when we look at people who have gotten the vaccine and get sick afterwards, they get infected with, they get a COVID infection despite having the vaccine, or they have a side effect from the vaccine. We see that same pattern, that it is people largely who are not metabolically healthy that are, suffering from these problems. So ultimately, my message becomes, whether or not you choose to get vaccinated, whatever else you're doing around COVID, being metabolically healthy is going to be an advantage. And that should be something that we are focused on. And unfortunately, none of our public health messaging has focused on that.
That's a really powerful statement coming from someone in that industry. And so would you go as far to say that the principles inside of your book would help alleviate the risk factors for a variety of conditions, not necessarily related to heart?
Yeah, no, it's clear that, these risk factors that we see are, related to poor metabolic health, and following the principles in the book are going to help you improve your metabolic health and therefore lessen your risk if you get exposed, or of even, getting the disease in the first place. We have data on both showing that, being in better metabolic health is going to lower the risk of getting the disease in the first place, and then, getting sicker once you have the disease.
Very powerful statement. Now, before we go, I have one thing. So what do you think it's going to take for this message to be kind of, put through our education system, put through our medical system, and put through our political system, whereby we are looking at the long-term care and vitality of our population? Is it through better insurance options? Is it through political policy? Is it through de-incentivizing lobbyist groups? Is it about public education? What do you see us to change this messaging? Because as you said, why do we continue to miss the opportunity when it's very clear what the risk factors are and that those can be mitigated through lifestyle change?
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to come from the system itself. The system is set up to maintain the status quo. And those that have a large amount of influence on the system currently, the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical company, the food industry, and quite frankly, the government is not inclined to change the system. So I think this is going to have to start as a grassroots type of movement. And I'm optimistic because I see that taking hold. More and more I go to medical meetings, low carb focused medical meetings, for instance, that, more and more physicians from all these different specialties are realizing the power of metabolic health and starting to, spread that word to their patients. I see lots of patients who are taking this to their physicians, like I talked about earlier. And ultimately, people are going to need to demand change. One of my central messages is people need to take back control of their health. They need to be in charge of their health. They need to fight back against this message that we can't be healthy as we get older, that we can't maintain good health through, the vast majority of our life. And when enough people start pushing back, then the industry is going to start to respond to that. Because ultimately, all of these things are businesses and they respond to the, desires of their consumers ultimately. So I think that is how change is going to happen. I think, there are some features within the system that are going to support this as well. We know that the United States and many other countries are being bankrupted by the cost of taking care of sick people. And so ultimately, I am optimistic that the system is going to start to come around to some of this and realize that we need to be doing more to keep people healthy. But that takes a long time. And for right now, I think it's an individual movement, and each individual needs to take back control of their health.
It's a beautiful message, and it's something that you obviously are not only an advocate for, but you're a product of someone who has transformed their health and that of others with your book. Can you share where people can find you, reach you, and get more information, all the social handles, all that sort of stuff?
Sure thing. So the website is ovadiahearthealth.com, OVADIA hearthealth.com. I'm most active on social media at Twitter, where I am at iFixHearts. I'm also on Instagram at Ovadia_heart_health. The website is really the best place for all of the information.
Dr. Ovadia, this is an extraordinary interview, and you've done a great service for our listeners. And I encourage all of them to come out and check out your book. And more importantly, take on the message. Don't just read the book. Don't take on the information. Don't just follow the social media stuff or go in and say, oh, that's cool. Actually go through those 5 parameters that you outlined, and get these metrics and look at it and concentrate on fixing those metrics, because the benefits are certainly going to be well worth the journey. I want to thank you for joining us today, and all of our listeners. If you like this, please hit the like button, share button with someone. There's probably someone that you know that is suffering from a debilitating heart condition and that could be prevented or reversed if you follow these principles. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you all on another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion, and a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.